Hi, welcome at today's Masterclass, How to Deal with Change at Work. My name is Jesper Viveen, and this Masterclass is brought to you by OpenUp. Today we will talk about change. If one thing is inevitable in life, it's that things change, especially at work. Your company might be growing rapidly, downsizing, you might get a new manager, a new role, a promotion. Things constantly change. In the next 30 minutes, psychologists Jochem and Madelief will tell you more about change. Why is change sometimes hard for us? What can we do to deal with it? And what are practical tips you can use in everyday life? At the end of the presentation, we will have a live Q&A here behind me. So you can ask questions. You can ask them via sending an email to webinar@openup.care, or you can ask them in the chat on the right side of your screen in YouTube. We will get back to them as soon as possible. I hope you're ready to learn more about change. I am. I'm also looking forward to receiving your questions and discuss them later. But for now, here is Madelief. Good luck.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Madelief, and today Jochem and I will gonna tell you a little bit more about change at work. So why this topic? Well, Jesper already told us, the world around us is constantly changing, and so is our work. And one of the biggest change from recent times is, of course, the COVID pandemic. So this had and has quite an impact on our lives, also at our working lives. So how can you actually deal with those kind of changes? We're gonna tell you a little bit more about that. So first I'm gonna explain you a little bit more about what a change exactly is. Then I'm gonna give you some examples of changes, how you deal with changes, and Jochem will give you some tips and tools how you can deal with those changes. And after that, there's some space and time for you to ask some questions. So we're really looking forward, and we hope you do too. So first, I would like to start with a question for you. So what kind of change did or do you experience at work? So you can put your answer in the chat, and maybe it's nice for you guys to see what you answer, and you have some interaction with each other, and we're gonna discuss it later during the Q&A. So what exactly is a change? Because change, you can think about a lot of things. Well, we see that change is a derivative of a renewal. So for example, the vision of an organization. Maybe the organization wants to be more sustainable, and they have to change their vision, and because of this vision, the company has to change. Or maybe for financial reasons, so the company has to expand or has to downsize because of those financial reasons. So you see that change in an organization has always an occasion or a reason. It never just happens like that. And there are also different kind of changes. So you can think about maybe a cultural change or a structural change, and there are also radical or less radical changes. So to give you some examples of change, I already told you a little bit more about the biggest change of recent times, of course, COVID. And we saw that it has quite an impact for us all. So maybe you had to do your work in a different way, or suddenly you were working from home most of the time, or maybe you lost your job because of COVID. So it has an impact on us all. But there are also smaller changes that can affect us. So you can think about getting a different manager, or maybe work in a different project team with different colleagues you're not used to, or there is a digitalization in the organization, or maybe because of COVID, a reorganization. So maybe you have to leave the company, or you can stay at the company, but there's happening and changing quite a lot. So you see there are many examples of changes. So how does change actually affect people? We see that most of the people find change quite difficult. In the book The Ladder from Ben Tichelaar, he describes various obstacles for us to change. So why do we think it's so difficult? And most of these obstacles are playing in our heads. And also being aware of these obstacles can really help you. So we see that automatic behavior often wins. We like to do what we're used to because That's the easier and faster way to do things. And you can see it as a highway in your brain, like to take the highway. But if you have to learn some new capabilities or new skills, it takes a lot more time and energy to develop these skills. So you have to build a new pathway in your brain. And the more often you take this pathway, the more easier it becomes. And the more sooner it will become a highway in your brain. But it takes a lot of energy. So to give you an example of my own, I'm not really used to giving presentations in English. So I'm used to giving presentations in Dutch. So for me, it costs more time and energy to prepare and do my presentation in English. But the more often I'm going to do it, the more easier it will become. But that's why automatic behavior often wins. So people like to stay in their comfort zone. And also our dislike of loss. So we don't like to lose things. So for example, maybe your role changed and you had to lose some autonomy in your role. So this can be quite hard for people. And also taking risks can mean that you're gonna lose something, and people don't like that. So that's why people find it quite difficult to change, and that's quite normal. So how does change really affect people? Well, we see that change can stir up a lot of emotions by people. So maybe you are worrying or stressing about a change, or you cannot sleep, or you're thinking about it a lot, or you feel some resistance or maybe anger, and that's quite normal and understandable because there's happening a lot, and it takes a lot of flexibility and resilience for us to handle those changes and to deal with those kind of changes. So if you feel this way, know that it is quite normal to feel this way. So yeah, we want to know how you deal with changes. So Jochem is going to tell you a little bit more about that.
So yeah, indeed. So how do you actually deal with change? Again, here the invite to either mail us or in the chat right next to you. Write down some answers. Maybe you can already see some tips that other people find when they're dealing with change, and maybe get some inspiration to that. So what it's really about, to me at least, is how do we deal with change? Because most often we cannot stop a big reorganization from happening, or a new manager stepping in, or I don't know, even sometimes it's inevitable that we should go to a different house, or I don't know, a pet may die. So I think change is a natural part of life, and the skills you need to deal with that effectively change over the course of your life as well. So what I'd like to do here is, before I get into some more practical tips on how to actually, deal with change effectively, at least according to some of the psychologists, I'd like to borrow a technique from one of my personal favorite types of therapy, which is ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. That really reflects maybe different ways that people tend to deal with change or cope with change. And they talk about the beach ball. So it's a bit of a metaphor that I'd like to take you in along. So I'd like to imagine this big sort of round, colorful beach ball that maybe you played with that when you were a kid yourself. So what we often do is when we see these negative emotions, then we do different things with it. And it's the same with a beach ball. When you're, for instance, at the beach and you're in the water, you may have noticed that you have these big inflatable balls. When you move away from them, they tend to follow you around. They tend to come back to you. And it's sort of the same with negative emotions, right? We tend to sort of try to escape them, maybe find some distraction, but it's sort of always there. So what a natural response for a lot of people is that we take that beach ball, that sort of ball of negativity there, and we try to suppress that. We try to hold it under the water. And then something funny happens, because for that instant, for that moment, this actually works, right? For that moment, you do feel less stressed about the change because it's not there, right? You're trying to suppress it. But maybe as a kid, you've tried this as well. If you hold a ball of water or a beach ball under the water, when we let go, it often sort of explodes back into our face. And then there's the other thing. Often it really takes a lot of energy to keep it suppressed. And this is the way that we're dealing with negativity very often as well. And I think the invitation that ACT in this metaphor is trying to do is try not to suppress the negativity when it arises. Try not to walk away from it, but try to sort of look at our beach ball of negativity here, or a difficulty with change, and try to accept it as it is. And acceptance doesn't mean inactiveness. It means actually to be able to say, all right, so I'm struggling with this, whatever it may be. And now I'm going to refocus. Now I'm going to do the thing that I wanted to do in the first place. And maybe it won't go as easy as normally, but I can still attempt to do it. So I think that the sort of the takeaway from that is sort of let change be difficult, because it is difficult, and it makes total sense that it is something that humans tend to struggle with. And then humans have different ways innately of actually dealing with change, which is what brings us to our first tool here, which is coping styles. Realizing that there are actually different ways of coping, of dealing with negativity in our life. So there's a difference between problem-focused and emotion-focused coping styles, in which the first one is really sort of focusing on, so what is the problem, how can I solve this in a sort of practical manner? And then the emotional-focused one is more, how can I solve my reaction to a problem? So there is an issue, and I feel, I don't know, angry or frustrated or sad about this, and maybe I can change my reaction to these things. And then there's a difference to sort of active versus more passive coping style. So do you tend to really dive into something when you try to deal with a change, or do you tend to sort of hang back a little bit? Funny thing is that there's definitely more effective coping styles than others. Take, for instance, seeking support could be a really effective coping style, or maybe using humor a little bit. But you can imagine that if this is the only coping style you know of dealing with change, then often what happens is that we become sort of rigid in our ways of coping with this. So, for instance, you become dependent on people that you feel supported by instead of being able to solve your own issues. Or if humor is your only coping style, then often we find it becomes very cynical when it's really hard to cope with. So I think the key to realizing that there are different coping styles is also an invitation to research your own coping style a little bit. So what are your preferences, and maybe where is your challenge that you can try the next time? Which brings us to an example of a more problem-focused coping style, which is energy management, which is actually one of the things that in our practice we deal with a lot, which is basically very simply, you can do this sort of right now, or you can start doing this tomorrow morning, is to make a list of the things that are draining your energy and that are giving you energy, so that are gaining your energy throughout a day. And this could be related to work, to your private life, and maybe one of your big energy gainers is to go into nature every once in a while, and maybe one of these energy drainers for you is making Excel files or these really long meetings that we're all aware of. And then the sort of coping thing that comes to that is we realize that, all right, so maybe when I'm in a period of change, when I'm in a period of transition, I can refocus on the things that actually give me energy instead of just focusing on the things that are draining my energy, and maybe see if you can put in some changes of your own to counteract that. Which brings us to the third tool here. I think this is one of the most basic one, but one of the ones that can have the most impact on the short run. And this is really looking into the emotions you're experiencing. So what often happens in any type of change that at least I'm aware of, that at some point people are going to get a little bit frustrated. Maybe you've experienced this yourself when you were in a period of digitalization, when some sort of new system was introduced to your company, or maybe when changing roles happened. Maybe you had to do stuff that wasn't required that you had to do first. So often frustration comes up. And in this example, this could mean a variety of different things, right? That frustration. But it's also an invitation to look into, what is it telling? What kind of need that I have isn't being fulfilled right now? And then often it's something like, in this instance, autonomy, right? Maybe you feel like you can't do the work you wanted to do in the way you want to do it. And then this becomes something that's frustrating. But it also opens up the opportunity here to take some things into action. So what can you do in order to fulfill that need that you have? So that in this case, this might be talking to your manager. And it really helps to separate these things, right? To really look at, all right, so I'm having an emotion. Instead of just focusing on, I don't know, anger or sadness, you're trying to look at, what is this signaling for me, and what can I do? And what is it actually telling me to do? To sort of listen to that inner voice that we all have going on. That brings me to, I think, already one of the last tools that we're having here. The fourth tool is to look at your circle of concern and your circle of influence. It's maybe known by some of you. Stephen Covey really made a big impact with his method here, and it's sort of brilliant in its simplicity, in my opinion, at least. It really looks into what are all the things that you are concerned with, and this can be anything from the outcome of your local soccer team to I don't know, what's happening in the world, to what's happening to your family, what's changing in your job, what's changing within your own life. And then it's really sort of listing all those things, looking, all right, so what is concerning me at this moment? That on its own can be therapeutic because it's not only in your head, it's on the paper, right? And then it's a very simple question. What of all the things that you have listed here do you actually have influence on? So maybe you cannot, for instance, change the way your manager is behaving to you in a direct manner, but maybe you can actually start a conversation with him, or maybe you can find some support of your colleagues who are experiencing the same thing, and maybe that's all the influence you have at that moment, and I think that's okay, which sort of brings me back to the ACT technique that I just mentioned. And I think the invitation here is to, instead of becoming more reactive, which maybe our sort of initial reaction to change is to sort of look back, hang back a little bit and see what's happening, is to change that into a more proactive stance, to see what you can do to increase your circle of influence. So there's different ways, right? There's seeing how can I have direct influence on some kind of outcome that I want to have. It's indirect influence where you try to change the behaviors of others, which can be having that conversation with a manager or with a friend that maybe can help you out a little bit, and then really accepting where you don't have the influence there. Which really brings us to the last part here, is to see if we can actually change our entire way of looking into change. And I think Madeleine has something for that for us.
Yeah, thanks, Jochem. Jochem told you a little bit more about the influence you have or don't have in a specific situation. And it helps you to get more insight in your circle of concern and circle of influence, to know what kind of influence you have yourself, and proactively deal with a situation, such like change at work. So to do that, a growth mindset can really help you. So I would like to see how your growth mindset is. And I would like to ask you this question. So what was the last time you did something completely new? So to give you an example, I just finished a course of neuro-linguistic programming myself. That's all about communication. So I developed a lot of new skills and I learned a lot. But you can also think about something smaller. For example, cycling a new route from your friend's home to your own home. So what was the last time you did something completely new? So maybe now you're wondering, okay, why does Madeleine ask me this question? Well, we see that trying and learning new things can really help you to deal with different and difficult situations, such as change at work. And here you see in the image two kind of mindsets. So on the left side, you see a growth mindset. And people with a growth mindset say that new things, trying new things, and dealing with difficult situations are a possibility to grow. They learn from it. So challenge makes you grow. And you like to try new things. And it don't have to be perfect right away. So it's all about trial and error. And only with failure you can learn from it, right? But people with a fixed mindset, they think, oh, I don't want to take risks because then there's a chance that I fail and I don't want to. So they prefer to stay in their comfort zone. And you can see it as a fixed mindset. So people with a growth mindset say, okay, I cannot do this yet. And people with a fixed mindset say, I cannot do this at all. So they don't think they can learn things. And that's quite difficult because if there are changes and you have to deal with them and you have to do something different or to learn new skills, it can really help you to just try it and to see what is happening. So a growth mindset can really help you. And it will help you to also see feedback as something constructive. And people with a fixed mindset say, oh, feedback, that's quite hard to deal with. And maybe someone has a critical comment. But people with a growth mindset say, I'm going to learn from it. I see it as a challenge. So it can really help you to deal with changes. And I can imagine this sounds great, but how can you really develop a growth mindset? So know from yourself if you have a growth mindset or more a fixed mindset can also be an eye-opener for yourself. So how do you look at the world and to new things and changes? And it's also good to challenge your beliefs. So can you develop something completely new? So I already told you, if you have a growth mindset, you're thinking, I cannot do it yet. And it can really help you to learn new stuff and new skills, for example. And also an environment of learning, challenge, and effort can help you instead of looking for an environment where perfection is central. Because nothing in life is perfect. And you cannot do something perfectly right away. For example, if you learn to, I don't know, snowboard, you can't do it immediately. You have to learn. And that's with everything in life, also at work. It's also good to ask for feedback. If you want to learn, you can ask other people how they see your learning progress. So see it as a process of growth. And also trying something completely new. So that's the reason I ask you what the last time was you did something completely new. Because then you go out of your comfort zone. And you can only grow when you go out of your comfort zone instead of being and staying in your comfort zone. Because then you won't learn new things and won't learn new skills. And also reflection with yourself. So frequently a check-in with yourself. So hey, how am I doing? What can I do to reach a goal? What do I want to achieve? How can I really grow? And what do you need to grow? And also, and maybe the most important thing, take small steps. So don't be too hard for yourself. Also, a little and small step is a step to achieve your bigger goal. So we told you a little bit about what a change exactly is, some examples of changes. Maybe you have another change in your work, so we're really curious to hear more about that. And Jochem gave you some tips and tools how you can really deal with those kind of changes, and especially with the emotions you're having. So we see that change is something from all times. The world is constantly changing and will never stop changing. So we have to deal with it. And it only can help us to be more flexible and resilient. And to see changes as a possibility to grow and to look at it with some enthusiasm. So maybe it's good for you to ask you these two questions. So what does growth really means to you? And how can you really grow? So thank you for your attention and time. We hope you enjoyed and have had some insights, and we hope to see you again. And now there's some space and time for the Q&A.
Thank you, Jochem and Madelief. That was a whole story already, but I'm sure that there's a lot of questions that people want to have answered on specifics.
Looking forward.
Sorry?
Looking forward.
Looking forward, yeah. Maybe to start with, you asked questions also during the presentation on how people deal with change themselves, and one response that came in was from Maxine. Maxine said, if something is changing, whether it's positive or negative, and I start to act a little bit weird, that's how she calls it.
Yeah.
I start sleeping less, I get more anxious, I distract myself. And one of the things that I do is make sure to just take time, sit down, feel my feelings, breathe, and kind of find herself again like that.
Yeah.
Is that something that you see that a lot of people do, or?
Actually, mind if I take this one?
Yeah, of course.
Actually, sort of reminds me at the time when during my bachelor, I took some time studying in Canada, and I remember the first time I went to a supermarket there, and it took me 2 hours, and which amongst the reason was that I found out that bell peppers were $2 a piece there, which is nuts. There's no way to eat healthy there. But it took me 2 hours, and I was exhausted afterwards by just sort of buying groceries, right? So I think that people tend to really underestimate what kind of psychological effect change has on people. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I experienced at that point. So yeah, I think that's really good, taking the time, sort of realizing that it takes some time, space, and effort to get used to a changing environment.
Yeah. And also it's good to hear that she takes some time for herself to check in and do some little reflection and just try to relax. that's really good.
Be
Some
in the
self-care.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to actually know, how am I doing? How am I feeling? What do I need? Yeah.
Great.
Good advice for others.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, and that's also why you ask it. I think to get inspiration from others.
Yeah.
Before we dive into questions, we already got some questions prior to the webinar, so there's a lot that we want to go through. I want to remind people watching that you can ask questions in the YouTube chat or via email, and we get back to you on those questions. One of the questions that we got in was, I noticed that I get frustrated when colleagues keep giving small, in my opinion, irrelevant comments on my work that causes small changes in documents, etc. So this is actually a smaller change, but something that builds up.
Yeah.
Do you have tips on how you can deal with these kinds of changes?
Yeah. Yeah, that's also a change, like a little change is also a change. Well, I think it's good to notice what you're feeling. Like, where's the frustration coming from? Is it only about this, or maybe about other things that are happening with your colleagues? And to try to start a conversation with them about it. So what is frustrating you, and what can they do to make you less frustrated? So an open communication would be really good. So I'm curious if she or he already done that. Yeah.
Because I think it's one of the things that you, Johan, mentioned in
I was thinking about that as well. Yeah. I think that often feelings like frustration are sort of a signaling light for something else, right? So it could be just that, right? You're just sort of annoyed that people do that, but then often it has everything to do with. I think it really fits well with the example I gave in the masterclass here. People tend to get frustrated when they have a certain way of working and they feel sort of infringed upon that way of working. So then, of course, to open up towards your colleagues is one way, but then also really make arrangements. Sort of, all right, so guys, it's okay if you give feedback, but maybe at set times, or sort of let me finish my work first, and then we're going to do that. So I think that's really sort of also about expectation management and being able to put forth what you expect and need from other people as well. Yeah,
which then I think if you look at the broader things, change and communication, expectation management, the words I heard you just describe are very important if it comes to change.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. And that's also why I love this question that we just got in, and that's, how do you communicate to your team or your team lead that you're struggling with change?
Yeah, that's definitely one. Well, I think first of all, it's good to realize that there's stacks of books being written about how to communicate in the most eloquent, perfect way, right? And then I think it's usually any way of communicating in this matter is already a better way than not communicating. So sort of start small, right? I'm sort of thinking about the last time I had that with when I was actually a manager instigating some sort of change in the company I used to work in. I tried to open up the room for that as well, but then I really tried to look for one-on-ones as well, because usually it's hard for people to really express what they're experiencing in front of a group, unless we create a safe space. So I think it is that, sort of try to get a moment, a one-on-one with the manager to express that. So sort of, I'm struggling with this, and then if it's a halfway good manager, he or she's going to ask, what part of this? So, and that's already something you can, of course, anticipate upon. So really look at yourself, all right, so what aspects of this change is actually bothering me? So you can, phrase that well.
So I actually heard two tips. One for more the manager, and one for the person who wants to bring up the communication or the challenge that he or she is facing. So first of all, any communication about it is actually good. I would like to dive a little bit into like a more practical way of how can I start a conversation, like how can I introduce it with my manager or with a colleague. And on the other end, I think it's also very important what you said is that a manager should ask questions. Yeah, and I think a manager has to start a conversation at first. So to be open about it. So guys, if you want to talk about this change, I'm here, and feel free to reach out. Then we're going to talk about it. So then it's easier for people to go to their manager and to start a conversation. And let's say you have a manager who doesn't do that. How do you then, I'm willing to start the conversation with my manager, but maybe you have one or two practical things or ways to bring it that can help people. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I can imagine people want to feel safe first to go to their manager and to feel some space to start the conversation. But if the manager doesn't start a conversation, yeah, you have to do it yourself. Yeah.
Is there a way that should I talk about what I feel? Should I talk about what others
I think
are doing?
what the change does to you, I think that's good. So keep it to yourself. So how does it have influence on you?
Yeah.
What kind of feelings do you have or do you experience? And what do you need from your manager, maybe?
Yeah, exactly.
Or to keep it to yourself, I think that's
and in
the
that
best you
sense,
can
make
do.
it keep it objective, right? Sort of keep
Yeah.
it about some sort of an observation that you are experiencing. So, for instance, I'm noticing that the higher management decided that we should all switch to system X instead of system Y, and I'm really experiencing that this doesn't work in this direction. So, make it concrete, make it observable, and then there's really a conversation about what you experience instead of, I think this is really, I don't know, stupid or dumb that we're doing this. That really sort of opens up the room for discussion, and what you want is to sort of literally sit next to somebody and look at an issue together.
Yeah.
Does it help to look at change as something positive? Does that already help you in your process?
I think so. So looking at it with a growth mindset, I think like a possibility to grow and to learn new stuff, it can really help you. Yeah. But still, it can be hard, of course. Yeah.
And is there a way where you can change your mindset from the negative thoughts that you might have into that growth mindset?
Yeah, I think being aware of those negative thoughts. In what way does those negative thoughts help you?
I think that comes back to what Irene and Mirta also explained in previous, the ons. Giving your thoughts a name.
Challenge your beliefs and thoughts.
Attaching a person to it, or name to it, and helps you detach a little bit from these thoughts.
Yeah, that's actually what I try to sort of convey with the beach ball metaphor as well. That sort of instead of identifying ourselves with our negative feelings that are maybe associated with the change, it's sort of just something that is there, right? And I think it also helps to see change not as something that is per definition difficult, because it is, at the very least, it's inevitable. It is, depending on your perspective, of course, something that it will always happen. So I feel it's a life skill to be able to deal with that.
Yeah.
And you might be more resilient to it at certain points in your life than in others as well. So it can change how you react to it.
Yeah, of course. If there's happening a lot in your private life. Yeah.
I do want to get back to that, starting a conversation one more time, because we have another question coming in about this. What are good questions to ask your manager or yourself? Or good tasks to do when you feel you can't really put your finger on what bothers you within a professional change? So I'm getting really stressed, I'm getting nervous, I'm getting really frustrated. I honestly have no real clue why. Yeah. What can I ask myself or my manager to find out?
Well, I think that sort of expressing exactly that is a very, very good starting point. Yeah. What we often have is that people, I've actually had a client the other week who said, I will get back to you once I have a very good question for you again, which sort of made me laugh at the moment in a hopefully respectful way. That said, you don't need a perfect question lined up before you actually approach somebody. Yeah. And that's also what I found, especially with young people in the COVID pandemic the last year and a half or 2 years. Where are we at? 30, I don't know. I found that, I heard lots of times that these people didn't know when to actually start asking for help and didn't actually know what kind of questions to ask. But not being able to phrase a question is a question for help on its own. So I think that's really a starting point. So I'm feeling more stressed than usual. Dear Mr. Manager or Mrs. Manager or anything else, could you sort of have a conversation with me about that? And I think that's a starting point. And then it's also, when it comes to more the questions you can ask yourself first, is I think being your own internal psychologist for that sense. And that means formulating hypotheses, or better yet, well, maybe it is this, or maybe it is that. Sort of try to make a list of things that are influencing your own stress level and see if that is actually doing something, if that's sort of buttons you can press and maybe change something about that. Sort of reflecting back to the story about coping that I just did.
Yeah, I agree.
Madali, what do you do when changes are happening, professional changes?
Yeah.
Well, anything you fall back to?
Yeah, well, actually, I like changes. So that helps me. And sometimes I find things hard or difficult. And to acknowledge that to myself, it really helps me. And I try to relax more. to do more mindfulness or meditation, to check in with myself and to be aware what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
So what do I feel in my body? Do I feel stressed, or I feel it in my back, for example?
So there are signals.
Or
Yeah.
get a head attack.
Yeah. Last week we had a talk at Open Up Conversations with Molly, Picnic, and Recruity, and one of the things I also liked about advices that they gave was find out the why.
Yeah.
And that can be very tough, right? Especially with professional change, or with there's a new manager coming, or am I getting a promotion, or the company's growing or downsizing. Like understanding the why helps you cope with change.
And we need a narrative, right? We need some sort of a story that is helping that, because I think that connects to the story that you were telling. The sort of we have a sort of automatic resistance to change, which because it's
nice in our comfort zone.
It is nice in our comfort zone. Yeah. So we're always going to need a reason to actually get out there, and it's also, I think that's also for managers really important to understand. You got to have that story really ironed down, and then still you're going to have a lot of resistance. That is sort of natural.
It takes some time also. So first people are having resistance more than after some while.
I think there's a nice question that comes down to this resistance, or how you can help or impact your team that is dealing with change, because in your team you're not the only one dealing with change. Everybody's dealing with change. There's a question here. I'm supposed to help my team in a new way of working, but there's a lot of resistance. What are small tips or steps that I can take to bring down a barrier of resistance, not only in themselves, but also in the team?
Really good question. I think, first of all, it's really good to listen to the team. So what is their resistance coming from, and what are those reasons? And to be there for them, and to start the conversation, and to take them seriously, and resistant as well.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the keystone there, to make them feel heard, and not just make them feel heard, actually sort of listen and maybe do something with that. Something that I'd like to do in a previous team where I had that is that at some point, because I was experiencing that, it was actually my initiative to implement a new system, and there was a lot of sort of angry people at me, sort of, why do you change my way of working? And, which I didn't actually saw coming at the moment, because to me it was a tiny change, but for them this meant doing all these different things. So I hadn't anticipated that well, I think. But what I did at some point is I got them all in a room, I grabbed the flip over, and I said, all right, so first of all, I can understand that the resistance is there, and I think this is okay for now. So what I started doing, I started listing all of them. So and it was a long list of issues they had, right? I said, all right, any other things, like
small, big,
I don't care, all of them, right? What I did then is I gave, and this you could do this online, of course, as well, but I gave them all a marker, and they had to vote which of the issues that we described there is biggest for you.
So I just want to stop you there, because I also think this is a good tip to do with yourself in case of need, right? So, sorry, keep on going on.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that I would actually do myself as well, to sort of mark, all right, so what is the biggest issues that we have here? What I do then is that I break the team up into smaller units, if that's possible, and I gave them all one of these bigger issues, and with the question, all right, so where is your influence here, if any? Usually some sort of intermezzo here where you talk, all right, are there any things that are going well to sort of change the mindset? And then breaking them to see if you can get them into this sort of solution-focused mode where they're looking, all right, so this is what we could do. That would result in a list of things that they could do, and then still some things that they couldn't actually do, and which my point, I felt it was my responsibility as a manager to start working with that. So then you have a very concrete list of things that are actually still causing a little bit of resistance, whilst also giving them the feeling, which I think is then correct, that you're going to do something with that. I think that's the most concrete thing I've ever done with that.
I think it's a nice example. And like I said, parts of this you can really use also for your own. Because I also like what are things that I cannot influence, what are the things that I can influence. And if I look at myself, for example, if it comes to change, then I would probably have to focus on the things that I can actually influence. The things that I can't influence, I can communicate about, maybe with my team or my manager. Maybe there's somebody in the team or my manager able to influence that. But also maybe trying to let that go a little bit.
Yeah, because frustration about something you cannot influence, it costs you a lot of energy, like negative.
What is a one tip thing to let go of the things that you can control? Is the breathing, sitting down, taking time for yourself, like Maxine does.
Yeah, for me it helps as well, but maybe
Do you
that's
maybe
for-
have like a breathing exercise that you can do then to relax a little bit? Is there a simple way?
I think the simplest I know is the one I use with a lot of clients lately, because I think there's been a lot of stress lately, probably, is the 4-7-8. I don't actually know the proper name for that, but that's just how I
I
remind
think
it.
it's called
4-7-8,
4-7-8
yeah, right.
breathe exercise. Yeah.
And the basic it's a very simple one. It only takes a couple of minutes. What you would do is you would. I mean, it's always important to sort of sit upright when we're doing these things, but you can do this lying down. You can do this in sort of any way you want to do. I've actually done it on the subway last week myself. So what I try to do there is you breathe in for 4 seconds, preferably through the nose, and it helps with that if you can really feel your stomach extend as you're doing that. So you're breathing in for 4 seconds, then you're going to hold that for 7, and the only way of knowing that you're actually doing that for 7 seconds is just to count slowly in your head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you're going to exhale via your mouth slowly for 8 seconds. You count that out to 8, and then you go back 4 in. You're going to repeat that 4 cycles, and you can probably already feel your heart rate going down, relaxing a little bit. And this usually creates a little bit of headspace to, deal with whatever you want to do. Yeah. I like to do this in the morning before I actually start making to-do lists and start checking emails and, in our case, Wire and whatnot.
4-7-8.
Yeah, and you can do it anywhere.
Yeah, right.
So also in the subway,
One more thing that's more relevant also to the stories that you already told about COVID change, a lot of things changing. A question here. My employer expects me to be at the office again 5 days a week. Might change again after last week's news, but I finally got used to working in a hybrid way. Yeah. And now I need to change things again. I know there's a lot of people who got pets or who got into a rhythm with their children differently. I can imagine. Or have more time to, I don't know, go for a run during the day and work in the evening. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that might change again. Is there anything that you can give these people?
Yeah, well, first of all, I can imagine that's hard because you have to change again. And from working hybrid or fully at home to 5 days a week at the office, that's quite a difference. So yeah, I'm wondering if this person has asked what the reason is to go back for 5 times a week. Is there a possibility to maybe stay at home, working from home 2 days a week? Is that a possibility or not? Because yeah, I can imagine that's quite a difference.
Yeah. And then there's also, I think, because what I liked in your example as well is that I think lots of people started doing anything from their laundry to daily walks to all these, I think, little helpful habits that sort of suddenly became much more easy to do whilst we're working at home, which, again, benefits as well. Is what I hear some people doing once they're back into the office is they get into this sort of regimen of when I'm at work, I have to work from 9 to 5 at least, and maybe, 6 is even better. And then I just start working, and people stop taking breaks, stop moving a lot, stop connecting to other people because they feel like when I'm at work, I'm going to put on my work face and my work hat and my work pants, and I'm going to do that. And I think that's one of the changes that I'm hoping to be able to see in the workspace as well, is that we can maybe lean towards a more healthy balance in work on its own. So for that person, it may be good to investigate. So what about working at home was so good for you? And maybe you can actually bring that with you to the office by, speaking your mind there. So how bad would it be if I actually go for a 15-minute walk, or can I actually take my pet, or, doing your laundry in the office is probably not a great idea, but, it's stuff like that.
Yeah. I think that's, and also, again, great advice for managers or leaders in the organization. Start up that conversation. What did you like about working from home? What were the pros, what were the cons? How can we facilitate in keeping those pros maybe, or taking away the cons in a way.
I mean, we actually saw this at Open Up ourselves, right? More people were coming back into the office, and then we installed more booths that we can actually do our consults in, which is a perfect way, because you have all that sort of nice social environment thing that I think is good about an office, also I can actually still sort of go back and do my own thing without being disturbed.
Yeah. Well, Jochem, Madelief, I want to thank you for your input. I think a lot of lessons have been shared. I want to thank you for watching. I hope you've learned a lot. Next month, we're going to talk about happiness. So I hope you're also ready for that. We hope to see you there. If you do have questions, or if you do want to talk to one of our psychologists, maybe even Madeleine or Jochem yourself, it's possible to do that one-on-one via the video call or chat. Just go to www.openup.com and you can book a consultation and talk to one of our psychologists within 24 hours. If you want to watch more webinars, do our online programs, health checks, that's also possible. Same URL, www.openup.com. And we hope to see you next month. Have a good day.